that ultimately he is under the control of Krishna. The person in false ego takes all credit for doing everything independently, and that is the symptom of his nescience. He does not know that this gross and subtle body is the creation of material nature, under the order of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and as such, his bodily and mental activities should be engaged in the service of Krishna and Krishna consciousness. The ignorant man forgets that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is known as Hrishikesh, or the master of the senses, of the material body. For due to his long misuse of the senses and sense gratification, he is factually bewildered by the false ego, which makes him forget his eternal relationship with Krishna. So I'll read the translation one more time. Maybe everybody can just repeat after me. The bewildered spirit soul, under the influence of the three modes of material nature, thinks himself to be the doer of activities, which are in actuality carried out by nature. So, before I came up here, I was thinking that so many times I heard so many lectures or people talk, and it can be hard to follow or kind of dry or boring. So I don't want to do that. Hopefully, I'll try to ask some questions and try to incite some thought. So hopefully everybody can bear with me and participate and think and give some feedback. So, I was thinking about this verse here and how it applies to our human nature. So the first question is, what is human nature? What actually makes us human? We're living, we're walking, we're seeing, we're breathing. And a lot of times it's easy to take this for granted. So if we really think what actually makes us human, it's a very deep thought. And it can bring very deep vision, deep perception. And we can look and see the animal kingdom. I was just in India, so I'm going to use those examples. I saw these little Indian squirrels and monkeys and cows all over the place, all these animals. And they're doing the same things. They're living, they're eating, they're sleeping, they have a family, they have a shelter. All those same things that we do. So my question is, what actually makes us human? What's the thing that separates us? So if we explore that, we'll see that we have this ability to infer, to question, to wonder, to come to a higher level of understanding. And Krishna, here he's speaking the Bhagavad Gita, which is a conversation between Krishna, the Supreme Lord, and Arjuna, who's a warrior on a battlefield. So Arjuna, he's getting ready to fight a war, a battle. And he goes out to the battlefield and he sees his friends, his family, his teacher, his grandfather, everybody that he knows is on both sides, and he becomes split of what to do. Imagine you have to partake in some activity like this, and you're split at ends with your family, your loved one, your friends. It becomes very difficult to make a clear decision. So Arjuna did not know what to do, and he was bewildered. So he turned to Krishna for spiritual wisdom, for guidance, for higher intelligence. And Krishna in this chapter is entitled Karma Yoga. So karma is essentially a word for action. And Krishna is explaining a way that you can act in the world but be unattached to it. Because Arjuna is a warrior, and naturally this is what he does. But now he's feeling like he can't fight. He's very disturbed. He's feeling very weak. So similarly, we may face similar situations. I'm sure we can all think of different situations that we've faced, maybe some big or maybe on a day-to-day basis. I'm sure for a lot of the people who come here, you have to go through some kind of austerity or challenge just to come here. to get in the car, you have to have gas, you have to plan out your day, you have to make certain sacrifices. And this is just a very, very small scale. So we all have our own personal battles such as this. So I was thinking about that in relation to this verse, is that we all have this nature that we're accustomed to because we go through a living life and we're associating with different aspects of the material nature. So who here has been to another country? Okay, quite a few people. And can somebody give me an example of what's different? Just really quick, something simple. Language, anything else? Weather, something else? Cuisine. Okay, these are three big ones. Yeah, so this is just an example of how when you're in a different time, a different place, a different region, we're affected by the elements, the material nature in different ways. So we may be born in a certain family. I may be born in India or in Israel or China or somewhere. And just being born there, because we're living there, it comes with a certain taste. We're used to eating certain foods that come from that place, a certain language, a certain nuance of culture, a certain way of thinking, a certain way of doing things, a certain way of, having relationships and raising family. So we're always affected by different aspects of the material nature. So in this verse here, Krishna is talking about the bewildered spirit soul. Under the influence of this nature, thinks himself to be the doer of the activities. So what that means is the spirit soul, which is our true self, which is beyond this body, beyond this false ego, is pure and beyond the influence of this material nature, which is always full of bliss, full of knowledge, and eternal. No death, no birth. Wouldn't this be nice? I don't know about you, but I recently was in a situation where somebody close was that left their body. And it can be very tough. I'm sure a lot of the people here have their own experience with loved ones or friends or other people passing away. So similarly, we have to do that too. But fortunately, Krishna is saying that we are eternal and we are not our body. So if we follow Krishna's teachings, we can come to the realization of seeing this. And he actually explains here in the Bhagavad Gita. So I hope to continue on that topic a little bit. So this material nature is always affecting us in so many different ways. And I found another verse that Krishna says later to Arjuna that was nice, that related. He says, the living entity in material nature thus follows the ways of life, enjoying the three modes of nature. This is due to his association with that material nature. Thus he meets with good and evil among various species. So what Krishna is saying is that due to this environment that we're surrounded in, the different aspects of the material nature, then we take on different personas, we take on different forms, we take on, a human form, an animal form, an Indian form, an American form, a boy form, a girl form, all these different things. And what we're doing is trying to enjoy. But because we're acting within the limits of the material nature, then we're always subject to duality. Because when we're seeking pleasure, distress is a natural part of life also. One example I'm thinking is if I want to work hard to have a nice house, then there's distress also because I have to work so hard to upkeep it. Or if somebody comes and burns it down, I'm not going to be so happy. So there's happiness and distress. This duality of life is always there. But Krishna, he's giving us the knowledge of how to overcome this. But even if we have knowledge, we may carry bad habits, different things that we may like to change. Can anybody think of an example, throughout your life, you you're acting in a certain way. You might be on track and in rhythm, or you might feel a little down and depressed and, out of connection. And you have this sense of a change. I want to change this aspect. Oh, if only I could, work harder at reading, if I could work harder at studying, if I could come to the temple more, or if I went to college and got a degree, or if I was more social and outgoing and made new friends. Maybe, I'm afraid to express my feelings and my emotions with my loved ones. We all have these different bad habits. And I encourage everybody to think and, meditate on personally different bad habits we may have that we want to change. Because this is what Krishna is talking about. This material nature is always influencing us to different degrees. And there's this battle between our inner world and the outer world. Because one time I was hearing a lecture from another devotee who was speaking on the Bhagavad Gita, and he was mentioning this point that some people can go through life and they find themselves in a situation where they're gathered with friends having coffee and they're reminiscing on the time that they were happy 10 years ago. They're talking about the glory times, the good times. So similarly, I don't know about everybody here, but me personally, I have a certain time, a period in my life where it's like, yeah, that was the good time. I was connected, I was eating properly. My thinking was proper. I was, hanging out with friends. I had a nice balance with work and family and everything. So to different degrees, we have this kind of experience and we tend to hold on to them. And we think, okay, if only I could get back there. But Krishna is saying this modes of material nature. It's always moving. So this can create an animosity within ourselves of this inner world and outer world. Because we're trying to find this peace, this happiness, this fulfillment. But no matter what I do, if I find it, whether it's through a relationship or through food or through intoxication or whatever we may do to find satisfaction, it's only short-lived. It's temporary because the world around us is always changing. It's always changing. Somebody give me an example of something that does not change. You could think of even like a big giant boulder or the Grand Canyon or the pyramids and some things that have been around for eons, so many years. They're still going to change. Everything is subject to the laws of nature, which is moving by time. So we are also not free from that. And we may have these bad habits and these different flaws and things that we become aware of, and we want to work on, we want to change. Or we can ignore them. Ignoring them seems easier. You could think of different situations that you've had where something difficult came up, and instead of facing with it and dealing with it, you just push it to the side rather than actually facing it in the moment, because it's overwhelming, it's too tough, especially to do on our own. But on the flip side, we can also use these things that afflict us, these bad habits, these bad tendencies, these things that we know that we do that aren't exactly right. We can use them as the impetus for change or for growth. Because first we have to accept that I may be in a position that I don't necessarily like, that I may not feel complete, or I could do better. And by accepting that and coming to terms with that, then we can use this as a factor of growth. And this growth is infinite, as described by Krishna. Krishna's describing how we can transcend these limitations that prevent us from tasting the true spiritual way of being, which I mentioned is full of bliss, full of purpose. So the way that this world is always changing, that I mentioned, is resemblance of the bigger picture of life. Has everybody here heard of the word samsara? Few people? Okay, nice. The samsara is explaining that all the living entities are stuck in this wheel, this circle of birth and death, or reincarnation. So there was another shloka that I found, a verse from the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is another book that we study, and a great sage is speaking. His name's Narada. He says, the living entity acts in a gross body in this life. This body is forced to act by the subtle body, composed of mind, intelligence, and ego. After the gross body is lost, the subtle body is still there to enjoy or suffer. Thus, there is no change. So what he's saying, and why I thought this noteworthy, because in connection with this topic of, we have these bad habits or tendencies or things that we're aware of that aren't exactly sitting with us for our best interest. He's saying that one can just carry their subtle body to another gross body, meaning this persona of who we think we are, of, I'm this person from this country, I was born in this family, I act this way, I think this way, these desires that I have, I'm this person who likes this kind of ice cream, I like this kind of car, I like these activities. All these things that we identify with are just made up with different desires that are essentially coming from our subtle body. So what he's explaining is we just take our subtle body from one gross body to another gross body. So maybe I didn't find the exact flavor I was looking for here in America. So then I have this desire for some other kind of culture. And then maybe my next birth, I'll take birth in a family in Mexico because they had something more suitable to what I was interested in that present time, place, and circumstance. But, the list goes on of countless examples. But the point is, there's this samsara, this cycle of birth and death, and material nature is always changing and shifting. And similarly, we are shifting through different bodies, trying to find different forms of pleasure and satisfaction, but it's always temporary. It's always temporary. But the thing is, if we learn to take up devotional service or bhakti yoga, as Krishna is explaining in the Bhagavad Gita, then all of our activities can be harmonized with the absolute truth, with God, with divinity. And through this harmonization, then all of our activities will become satisfactory, will become fulfilling. Who here has had an experience where they put so much time and energy and thought and planning and meditation on, a certain event or a certain thing you wanted to get, some kind of object or even a relationship, and then later to learn that this thing that you got, it did not bring you satisfaction. Not at all. Maybe for a little bit, but then it's often followed by this feeling of, a letdown. I know this phenomenon is especially there. People get new cars. You can see it all the time. They get a new car. They take care of it. They polish it up. They clean it. But then, eventually it gets dirty. It gets a little scratch, or the neighbor gets another new car that's newer than your car. And, immediately you don't have that same high, that same feeling of, yes, this is my new car. Well, this is just one example that I thought of, but again, I implore everybody here to think of their own examples of how these things, these aspects relate to all people throughout all time, all places, and all circumstances. This is the beauty of the Bhagavad Gita. I could speak the same Bhagavad Gita in the Chinese language and speak to the people in the Chinese culture, and it will still speak true. Or I could speak it in Hindi and speak it in India, or I could speak it in Spanish and speak it in Mexico or other places, South America. Still true, because Krishna, he's speaking to the nature of the soul, which goes beyond the material nature. And like I mentioned, and I'll reiterate many times, that this material nature is always changing. It's temporary. But by coming in contact with the spirit, then we can rise above this and we can see this. And just being able to see this allows you to take a step back and you can see a much bigger picture of what's going on. So there's another shloka in this same chapter where Krishna is explaining that one must realize that contact with the senses is the source of suffering. Oh, what this could be? How could the sources of how could the senses be the sources of suffering? You know, I eat ice cream. It tastes good. It makes me feel a certain way. I feel happy. I feel elated. But if we examine this point that I just mentioned of how we're always thinking and planning about some idea, some plan that will bring us happiness. And something I like to meditate on personally is that everything we do is for our own well-being, to bring us happiness. And again, this is a very simple point, but if you can meditate on this, you'll see every single thing we do. You know, like just a second ago, you were sitting in a different position, and now you're sitting in this position. Why? More comfortable, exactly. Because we're always trying to find more pleasure, to be more satisfied, to feel more comfortable within the material world. But nothing is static, nothing stays the same. So it's always changing, so therefore we always have to maneuver with it. But then because we're interacting with different aspects of the material nature, it influences us in different ways. And it creates different thoughts, different desires, and different activities. So what Krishna is saying is that the bewildered spirit soul, he thinks that he's the one that's solely in control of his life. I chose to go work this job. I chose to have this family. I chose to live in this country and think this way. In the third canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, Lord Kapila, he's speaking to his mother, Devahuti, and he's describing the process that how when somebody leaves their body, like I mentioned, they leave with their subtle body and they go to another gross body. So he's explaining how that actually takes place, and then how the soul leaves and goes through this process which we call death, and then is brought into the womb of a mother and takes a new body as an infant. And he describes what it's like in the womb. Because a lot of times, you know, for people who are new here, we talk a lot about birth and death. Because birth and death both have suffering along with it. And, you know, like I was talking about earlier, death, it's clearly there to see how suffering is involved. And a lot of times we don't really think about birth being as a source of suffering. But in the Bhagavatam, it's described that when you're cooped up in your mother's womb, it's dark. It's tight, you're cramped up, you can't move, you can't breathe properly. If your mother eats something too spicy, then you're eating something too spicy and you're like a little tiny baby that can't tolerate these things. So everything's burning. There's little worms and parasites that are pecking at you. And he goes on to explain what it's like after this person is born. And he explains how we take birth in a family and we're a baby. And then there's immediately people taking care of us. And I may be crying because I'm sick and my stomach hurts. But then my mom comes up and says, oh, he's hungry. Let me give him some more food. So I'm trying to say, no, my stomach hurts. But then I'm getting more food. And then further, you grow up and all these ideas and impressions are placed upon you. Because you grow up in a certain time and a place in a certain family. Then by the time you could think for yourself when you're like a teenager, you have this identity loaded in your mind of who I am. So then I think I'm this person, I'm from this family, I'm from this country, I have to act in this way, I have to do this way. And in this way, we think we're free, but in actuality, we're more so a product of our environment. But Krishna is giving the knowledge so which we can overcome that. So throughout history, the country of India, where, the Bhagavad Gita was spoken, was much more connected with this transcendental knowledge, and the aspect of Dharma is strongly considered. So Dharma means, one's essence, one's purpose. So here in the Western world, we can observe. You go out and you do whatever you want to do. This is the American dream, right? Happiness is out there. You just have to go grasp it in your own way. But because we hear this transcendental knowledge and hear about Dharma, the essence of ourself, of what life is all about, then you can clearly decide what activities are worth pursuing and which are not worth pursuing. And that's what Krishna is speaking about. The intelligent man sees the senses as a source of misery. So again, just to mention, like I was in India, I was in Vrindavan, a very holy place, where everywhere you look, you see different holy people chanting Hare Krishna Mahamantra. You see different sadhus, you see paintings of Krishna. So everywhere you look, you're reminded of this higher aspect of life. But then immediately upon returning here, I noticed you go out and you see, people doing drugs, people doing like drinking, people eating meat, people dressing very provocatively. You see advertisements with all the same things. So if we grow up in this culture, then we think these things are normal. We think this is just fine. This is how life is. And then you could go visit a holy place and you think, oh, this place is weird. What's wrong with this place? They have like this, they do like that. So I'm just trying to show another example of how we're conditioned to a certain outlook, a certain view of the world. But by hearing Krishna's teachings, we can immediately transcend that. So Krishna, ultimately, he's explaining how we can act in the world but still maintain the spiritual consciousness, because, like I mentioned, Arjuna is getting ready to fight this war. He doesn't tell Arjuna, fighting is no good. No, don't fight. He says, Arjuna, like your nature is to fight. Similarly, like I have my own nature to act in a certain way. You have your own nature to act in a certain way. So do you. So do you. We all do. Krishna's not saying abandon that and give that up and just try to become a monk, a yogi, and try to control the mind and be still and do nothing and come to this oneness that's just seeking new experiences that have no purpose. No, he's saying, be yourself, but take all your activities, your thoughts, your doings, your consciousness, and connect it to the Supreme, to the absolute truth, to Krishna. Because when we connect it to Krishna, then immediately everything becomes purposeful. Because where there's Krishna, there's reality. And when things are separated from Krishna or God, it's illusion. Because, as I mentioned, to reiterate again, it's just the material nature, which is always changing. So what we think that we know concretely, that's taught by modern science, that's taught in our schools, it's just this material nature, which is always changing. But as Srila Prabhupada, he pointed out here in this report, was that the source of this nature is God. And if we can meditate on that, we can see the connection. I remember one time talking with a friend, and some people are averse to talking about God. It's a difficult topic for most, at least in America, I find. Because it comes with so many preloaded ideas and beliefs, and people have a lot of harsh feelings about it. And I remember I was talking to a friend, and I would make some of these points coming from the Bhagavad Gita, and I would connect it to the word God. And as soon as you say that word, it's like he had an allergic reaction, like he can't hear. But if I said the word nature, then he could grasp it. Because nature, everybody can see that nature is greater than myself. Nature is greater than humanity. We can try to act in a certain way, live in a certain way, but just like if I build a sandcastle on the side of the beach, what's going to happen? is going to get destroyed. So similarly, all these buildings we find ourselves in are just like because they're temporary and they'll be destroyed over the course of time. But the point is, it's easy to see how this material nature is supreme. There's something greater than ourselves. And that's good. That's a big step to realize I'm small. I'm insignificant. There's something bigger than me. Okay, let me try to understand how it's actually working. Because some people have the mentality that everything is just random. It happens by chance. And if everything is happening by random or chance, I bring up the question, why is there so many patterns? Why does everything seemingly work so fluidly, work so nicely? In one movie I saw one time, the point was made that humans are like parasites. If you look at the animal kingdom, like I mentioned, this difference between the animals and the humans, we're all doing the same things, but the animals, they're living in compliance with nature. Except for the monkeys, maybe. The monkeys go and steal everything there. They're pretty rascally. But the point is, they're taking what they need that's given to them by nature. The cow eats a little bit of grass. It's happy. The tiger, it eats a deer or it eats a monkey. It's happy. And is it wrong that the tiger is eating meat? No, that's what the tiger is designed to do. Everything has its place within this nature. But the human, we're thoughtful. We're able to see, I do this action, it has this result. But what do? We can look around at our present day in culture. There's so much pollution, so much destruction. Like I mentioned, I just came back from India, and pretty much everywhere you look on the side of the streets, there's just piles of plastic and trash and, so much contamination in the water, the air. It's quite intense. Where if we learn to live in a simple way with what God provides through this nature and taking everything in this nature and acting in a way to take this and offer it back to Krishna, then immediately life becomes so simplified. It becomes so pure, so meaningful, so blissful, so joyful. But Srila Prabhupada, he always points out that what's the point of all these big factories that we have? Who here has been to one of these mega cities? I'm thinking of personally being in New York City and driving outside of New Jersey. And as soon as you get the outskirts of town, all you see is big giant factories. You've seen them? You'll see. Big factories, they produce so much smoke, so much pollution. But these things can't produce food. What do we actually need to live? Really think, what do we need to live? Do I need this phone? Do I need these glasses? Glasses help, but do I need them? Not. I could do without them. But do I need food? Yes, I need food. Can we grow food in a factory? I don't know about you, but I can't eat nuts and bolts. We can't do it. So this Vedic culture is teaching us a way to live, to feel fully satisfied with the simplicities of life, living in congruence with nature, connected to the divine reality that Lord Krishna is presenting in the Bhagavad Gita. And in this way, life can become sublime. It's a very, very easy process to take up. And it all begins with chanting of Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Thank you, everybody, for patiently hearing. Does anybody have any thoughts, questions, reflections? If not, yes. Jai Kesha Prabhu. I guess while they're waiting for the microphone, I was just going to read this one last verse that I noted down about how Krishna is talking about how one who's acting transcendentally, he can become free from these elements of nature, but still act within the world. He says, one who performs his duty without attachment, surrendering the results unto the Supreme Lord, is unaffected by sinful action, as the lotus leaf is untouched in water. So a lotus can sit in water, but the water just beads right off of it. Similarly, we can be here seemingly walking around in the material world, but completely spiritual consciousness.
Yes, question. How do we maintain this attitude of, seeing the world in that way, but not becoming negative, I guess? Yeah.
How do we see the world this way, but not become negative or inimical? In one way, it's not wrong to be negative. We have to recognize the futility of material life. That, I know growing up, where I grew up with the news, the media, the people in school, everything's saying, go out, go get money, go get women, go get, drugs, go get a job, go get these things. These things will bring happiness. So we could see that they don't bring happiness. So we should be inimical and negative towards that aspect of life, that's being promoted and accepted. But I believe in the Christian tradition, there's a saying, hate the sin, don't hate the sinner. So we can always be compassionate for those who are bereft of this transcendental knowledge and try to share that with the world. But at the same time, like I was mentioning, if we're living in this simple way that's connected to the way that the Lord wants us to live, then we're free from all this nonsense, and then life can become enjoyable here. It can become Vaikuntha, which means no anxieties, no worries, no problems, right here. And one of the best ways to experience that is visiting the temple. Better way to experience that is to visit the temple often. And the best way is to just live at the temple altogether or in a community of devotees. Because when you're in a community with devotees, even if people are falling subject to the senses, they know it's not right. But in our culture, it's like jammed down our throat. Like you have to go enjoy your senses. If you're not doing that, something's wrong with you. It will never bring satisfaction. So, in that way, it's a few ways to look at it. Is there any other points of interest or thoughts? Yes, Magadari Prabhu.
So I'm interested in this point about the doer, that I walk across the room and I feel like I'm definitely walking across the room. So my question is, am I only walking across the room when I'm doing it for Krishna, or is that also not me doing it?
How am I not the doer if I'm the one walking across the room? Very good point. In the Vedic literature, it's described that the living soul, the jiva, as us, as Krishna is saying here, the bewildered spirit soul, is Ishvara, which means controller. What's a synonym for controller? Doer. So we are a controller. We have this propensity to control the world around us, to do things. But our potency to control is very minuscule, very small. And the Lord's potency to control is absolute, supreme, infinite. So the Lord's Parameshwar, and we are Ishvara. So we have this minute propensity to do and act, but our activities and actions are always subordinate to the modes of material nature. This person may act or walk in a certain way. This person may walk in another way. It's all coming from different influences of this. And one could raise the question, okay, if Krishna's saying that the person's not the doer, and then I'm sitting here saying that the Lord is the Parameshvara, the supreme controller, what's the point of life? Like, don't we have free will? Don't we have our own choice? So this free will is described, and I like the analogy that, imagine right now, everybody imagine, you have all these tasks you have to do in life that are tedious, that you have to do. You have to brush your teeth. You have to pay your bills. You have to go to work, and you have to cook for your family. You have to do all these different things, take care of your body. Wouldn't it be easier than instead of doing that, you just had a bunch of robots that could do all these things for you? You had a robot to brush your teeth. You had a robot to change your shoes. You had a robot to do this, to do that. Eventually it gets boring because then all these machines are just doing everything for you, and there's no relationship. You would much rather prefer, I would, to have somebody who was there sharing with me that was doing it imperfectly, because then there's a connection between another person who has a unique independence. So similarly, our free will, it's like this. Krishna, if he wanted, he could have us all acting like minions, little robots, doing everything that he wanted us to do, acting in a perfect way. But he gives us this limited free will so we can act. And if we're not hearing the message coming from Krishna, then our actions will be subordinate to the material nature. But if we hear the message of Krishna and turn to Krishna with love and devotion, with a little bit of faith, then Krishna will reciprocate. Krishna will reciprocate with our actions, our activities. If we come to the temple, Krishna will reciprocate in some way or some form. If we come more often, Krishna will reciprocate more. If you come all the time, and if you can't come all the time, give whatever charity donations you can, so those who have all the time can spend their time studying the scripture and chanting Hare Krishna and fulfilling their life's dharma, Sanatana Dharma. Krishna will reciprocate. Krishna is perfect, and he knows exactly what we need. I don't know about you all, but I never know what I need. I never know what I need. I think, okay, I feel this way. I feel bad. Let me eat this thing. Let me eat this way. And then I'll feel better. Let me lay down and sleep for this long or do this, and then I'll feel better. It's always never right. So what I've realized is I'm expert at knowing what I want. Krishna, he's expert at knowing what we need. So if we turn to Krishna with that faith and pray, Krishna, please bring me whatever I need in life. I don't know. I'm not perfect. I have faith that you have the vision. Krishna will reciprocate. Krishna is perfect and all-knowing. He knows the sincerity of our hearts. I could come to the temple every day and stand in front of the deities, and I could make the most elaborate prayers. But Krishna could see within our hearts whether we're actually serious or not. Krishna knows if we're truly sincere and we really want to know Krishna. And maybe we don't believe in Krishna. We don't know if Krishna's there. But if we sincerely want to know if Krishna's actually there, Krishna will reciprocate. This is his promise. And I could sit here and vouch, and I'm sure a few others can, that this is the greatest scientific experiment. In science, there's a hypothesis. If this, then that. If you do this and mix this chemical, then you'll get this kind of reaction. So what I'm proposing is that if you give some attention, give some faith, give some your ear, your mind, your charity, give whatever you can to Krishna, then Krishna will reciprocate. So it's a bit of a long-winded answer, but there's a nice point that you raised. Is there any other last comments, thoughts, reflections, challenges? Yes, Prabhu. We have a microphone. Thank you.
My question is Krishna a person who was born thousands of years ago, or what is Krishna?
Is Krishna a person who was born thousands of years ago, or what is Krishna? Krishna is eternal. Krishna has always been and always will be. So when Krishna appears here on this earthly planet, he's just appearing to enact a pastime for a certain reason. So he's coming to protect his devotees, to share the knowledge of the Bhagavad Gita, so we can hear this wisdom, so we could come back to him. It's not that Krishna is subject to a material body like we are. When we take birth in a material body, as I've been mentioning the whole time, we're limited and controlled by the material nature. So Krishna is above the material nature. He says countless times in the Bhagavad Gita, but the supreme statement, you could say, he says, Aham sarvasya prabhavo. I am the Prabhu of all. I am the controller of all, the master of all. And he says, everything emanates from me. This is Mata Param Nanat Kinchidasti Dhananjaya. This is another sloka. He says, there's no truth superior to me. Everything's emanating from me. So Krishna is the supreme well-wisher, an eternal person who is residing in the spiritual world with his loving associates. And he comes here and enacts these pastimes that are in the spiritual world and other pastimes, his leelas, to attract us back to him. So if we just give our attention, our ear, and hear, Krishna will become pleased. Just like imagine right now you meet a new person here, a new friend, and that person really wants to know you. And they say, okay, where did you grow up? You know, what did you study in school? All these background stories that bring you to being you. Naturally, that brings us some pleasure, some satisfaction. Oh, this person's showing interest in me. How nice. Let me reciprocate with him. Similarly, if we express that same interest to understand about Krishna, Krishna becomes pleased.
And if there is any connection between Krishna and consciousness?
Yeah, Krishna is the source of consciousness. Krishna, in the Brahma Samhita, it says, Ishvara Parama Krishna Satchidananda Vigraha. He says, Krishna is the supreme controller, reiterating it. And this is not Krishna saying it himself, this is Lord Brahma. And he's saying Krishna is the source of Satchidananda. And everything is a creation of Krishna. So whatever is here is just a minute spark that's emanating from Krishna. So like I mentioned before, we're Ishvara. We have consciousness, but our consciousness is very limited. Krishna has supreme consciousness. And the example is given that I'm conscious of what happens in my body. If you have indigestion in your stomach or you hurt your ankle walking here, I have no way of telling. But Krishna is conscious of all. So Krishna, he provides this consciousness. And one could ask this question, what is consciousness? Which in the scientific field, this is a budding question that's kind of pushing the boundaries of what we know of science. But in the Vedic literature, it's describing consciousness as a symptom of the soul. So we are consciousness. We're always consciousness. This is the nature of the soul. You can't have the soul without consciousness. So every living entity in the spiritual world, in Vaikuntha, and beyond, is full of consciousness. Satchidananda, because that's the nature of the living entity, the jiva. To be always conscious. But because, just to wrap up what I've said like 10 times already, because we're influenced by the ever-changing material nature, as it's described in the shloka, then we think we're actually the doer and we're control. But really, our consciousness is just covered by the modes of nature. And then because we're affiliated with different elements of nature, we experience lust in different ways. So I may be born in India, or a family from India, and I have this drive or lust for a certain activity, a certain food, a certain job, a certain social standing. Or I may come from America, like a degraded family, and I'm lusting after sex and drugs and rock and roll. Or there's many different examples. But the point is, We have different aspects of things that we've been associated with, and it drives our activities in a certain way. But if we can overcome that by hearing Krishna's message and chanting this Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, then our consciousness will become cleansed, and we can see clearly that when we render service to God, we become immediately connected with the whole, and we become satisfied, we become fulfilled. Whether you're a monk living in the temple, whether you have a family, whether you're a single woman, whether you're a dog, whether you're a cat, whatever the situation, we just need to connect whatever we have to Krishna, and this is the perfection of life. So I think now is the time for Arti. Thank you everybody for kindly hearing Srimad Bhagavad Gita. Hare
So now we'll have Arti. So we'll have everyone go to the front of the temple facing the deities. The women usually stand on the right side, the men on the left. If you need a songbook, you can approach one of the monks in orange. Thank you for coming, Krishna.
If you pick up the songbook, this is on page 29. Eva Jayo Jaya Gora Chander Arotika Shobha. Janavi Tatavane Jagamanalobha. Dakinenitacha Bamegadara. Nikate Advetashini Vasa Chatradara. O Siyache Gorajan Radna Singha Sane. Arati Korem Brahma Hari Devagane. Narayan Hari Hari Gauri Chamaraya. Sanjaya Mukunda Vasu Gosarigaya. Ganga Baje Ganta Baje Baje Karata Lam. Madhuramridanga Paja Parasalam. Bhave Chandra Jini Badana Husha. Galadeshe Banama Gori Jalam. Sheva Shukana Radha Lemegadaga. Hakate Vino Radeke Samba. Page 4. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prashtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namine. Page 4. Namaste Saraswati Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyabhari Paschatya Desha Tarine. Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Harvesa Garam Shri Vasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Sari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasari Gaurang Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Hare Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Sila tangka nakalaye. Ito nusingha para to nusingho. Yato yami tato nusingha. Pahir nusingho hridaye nusingho. Narasingha Madim Sharanam Prapadye. Bhavakara Kamalavare Nakam Adhuta Shringa Dalita Hiranyakashipu Tanu Bringa Keshavadrita Narahari Rupa Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare. Lord Nrsingadev ki, Prahlad Maharaj ki. Jai.
Shri Shri Gaurnitai ki jai. Hare Krishna, dear devotees. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. And this was the arti. We were singing a few bhajans, a few songs written by the acharyas, and we chanted Hare Krishna. These are some of the main processes for purification of consciousness in this age. So thank you for taking part. And now we'll take part in the next process of purification, which is called Prasad Seva. So we will take foodstuffs that have been offered to Krishna. They've been purified and sanctified by being offered with love and devotion to Lord Krishna. So now we will take that. Before that, there are some announcements. So today is the Ekadashi day. Ekadashi Vrat ki jai. So on Ekadashi, which comes approximately twice in a month, we're fasting from grains and beans. And one can make a lot of benefit by chanting the holy names on this day. So thank you for being here and being part of that. Like I said, those come a few times in a month. And those are the recommended days for performing fasts, because we do so as a service to Lord Krishna, and they're great days to make benefit. So today's the Ekadashi day. We have a special Ekadashi feast prepared with different varieties of foods. There'll be some tapioca or some different items, which we don't usually have for the Sunday festival. So that's fun. And in addition to that, there will be an initiation ceremony coming up very soon. Nrsimha Chaturdasi is coming up. It's actually on May 4th. And Nrsimha Dev we were singing a song just now. Jagannath Prabhu sang that. And we were singing that in glorification of Lord Nrsimha Dev. You can find him in this picture next to the pillar here. And we celebrate this incarnation of Krishna. specifically on this Nrsimha Chaturdasi. So that'll be May 4th. That's coming up. Mark it on your calendar. We'll be doing an event that day. There's also, as far as I understand, it doesn't line up on a Sunday. So we're probably going to celebrate on the Sunday. Look for that on the WhatsApp. And if you would like to join our WhatsApp group, we send few times, we send a little reminder about festivals coming up. So let us know. And other than that, we will actually take prasadam. We can stand up, but let's do so quietly, and we can chant and call in response the prasadam prayer. If you know it, please sing along. So everyone can please stand, and we can form a line here and take prasad. And meanwhile, I'll chant the song. Sharira bijaja Jodindriya taheka Jive file vishaya sagure Dharma je jivati Loba moy sudharmati Take je takatina samsare Krishna baradoya moy Kori bhara jiva jai Swaprasadana dilo bhai Senamrita pao Radha Krishna gunagao Primidako Chaitanya Nitai Shri Shri Gaurnitai Bhagavat Prasad ki jai Harinam Sankirtan Yagya ki jai